This is a story of a Welshman who lived in the 1800s, and in one way he was very much ahead of his time. That's because, like some celebrities today, he was famous during his earlier life for nothing much at all. He was known as a dandy, a description that's little used today, and it was used to describe someone who strives to be fashionable and stylish. And in fact, he was such a style icon of his time that his image was used as a collector's item in cigarette packets. So although he was once well known, he is little known today. So why make a video about him? One reason is that he did what few others did. He wrote a detailed account of his life and times, including a vivid description of one of Europe's most decisive and famous battles. Rees Howell Gronow's story ranges from being an army officer at the Battle of Waterloo, becoming a fixture in high society, bribing his way into Parliament, being thrown into jail and marrying into French aristocracy. He wrote about the times in which he lived in his 4 books of reminiscences. I'm just going to take a look at one of them. Rees was born into a quite well-off family in 1794, the eldest son of William Gronow and his wife Anne of Court Herbert in Neath, South Wales. William seems to have been an interesting character in his own right. He had numerous occupations, including banker, colliery owner, and, get this, surgeon. The family somehow became sufficiently prosperous to send young Rees to Eton School, where he became friends with the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. In 1812, at the age of 18, he obtained, or more accurately, his family bought, an army commission. He joined the 1st Regiment of Foot Guards. He was shipped out to Iberia, where he served in the latter stages of the Peninsular War, that conflict mainly between Spain, Portugal and Britain against the invading French under Napoleon. This was not an age of meritocracy in the army. If you wanted to be a captain, your family stumped up the cash, and hey presto, you were a captain. And Gronow tells us what we can easily imagine, that the young, inexperienced officers were clueless. He wrote, "We entered the army without any military education whatever. Only the excellence of our non-commissioned officers alone prevented us from meeting with the most fatal disasters in the face of the enemy." He served under the Duke of Wellington, whom we came to admire greatly. He describes the campaign, the carnage of its battles, and the countryside. He was impressed that the French were far better dressed than the British, but noted that they had inferior weapons. He also admired the French cavalry uniform, because Rees liked stylish clothing. Army discipline was harsh for the rank-and-file soldier, as Rees tells us. A soldier was convicted of forging Spanish dollars from pewter spoons. He was sentenced to 800 lashes, during which he died. Would it not have been better to have condemned him to be shot? It would have been more humane, certainly more military, and far less brutal. At this point, it's worth highlighting the fact that Rees Gronow's reminiscences were written long after the events. He writes about conversations and even what people were wearing with remarkable and perhaps suspicious detail. He wrote waspily and often wittily. It's also worth remembering that at the time of writing, he needed the money. After these successes of the Peninsular War, Gronow found himself in southwest France. He seems to have had a splendid time, considering the war was still on. He attended a ball, hunted with hounds, and tried fine wines. He also had a servant, a Sicilian man who foraged for his food. As Wellington's forces pressed on into France, Gronow tells us about many engagements, including the bloody Battle of Nivelles, in which more than 10,000 died. The army paused at Bordeaux, where Rees seems to have had another good time. Officers enjoyed fine dinners and wine, and he wrote that he had an opportunity of meeting some of the prettiest women of a city famed all over Europe for its female beauty. By now, the army was in a much more professional shape, following a government inquiry and action to reduce corruption and inefficiency. In 1814, Rees found himself back in London. He somehow became one of the select few who gained admission to Almack's, the private club for the cream of society. It was a place so posh that, according to Gronow, even the Duke of Wellington was once turned away when he tried to enter wearing the wrong clothing, presumably not trainers. Rees's life was now a social whirl. He was a good-looking and an exceptionally well-dressed man about town. He was in the news, and images of this stylish man were displayed in clothing shop windows. Were he alive today, he'd be a regular in the pages of tabloid newspapers. He was remembered after his life by being on a series of collectible Players' cigarette cards. The theme was notable dandies throughout the ages. His memoir, because it isn't really an autobiography, is filled with a blizzard of names and gossip about princes and princesses, lords and ladies, knights of the realm. Anyone was anyone at that time. And somehow he became a member of White's Club, which was, as far as I can see, normally restricted to the titled and rich. Rees noted that there was a lot of hard drinking going on, with some members drinking as much as 4 or 5 bottles of port a night. He wrote, "The only thing that saved them was drinking very slowly and out of very small glasses." Rees came to know the famous fashionable dandy Beau Brummel, who was a favourite of the Prince of Wales. He said that Brummel labours to arrive at the most attractive and gentlemanly mode of dressing the male form. He tells us that Brummel fell off his horse and broke his nose. However, although his nasal organ had undergone a slight transformation, it was forgiven by his admirers, since the rest of his person remained intact. When Napoleon was on the march again in Europe, Rees was disappointed that his regimental battalion was to stay in London. But then he ran into fellow Welshman General Sir Thomas Picton. On hearing of his disappointment, Picton told him that if his aide-de-camp was killed, which is not at all unlikely, then Rees could have his job. Rees was concerned that he didn't have enough money to buy a uniform grand enough for such an esteemed position. So, according to him, he borrowed £200, went to a gambling club and turned it into £600, which was enough to buy his fancy uniform and 2 horses. And so Rees went to Flanders with Picton. But the general's aide-de-camp had, perhaps frustratingly for Rees, failed to get himself killed. And so, with no job vacancy, Rees was told to join another battalion of his regiment. Soon he was back in action at the Battle of Quatre Bras and then at Waterloo, where he writes about the square deployment of soldiers. "You looked along our lines, it seemed as if we formed a continuous wall of human beings. I recollect distinctly being able to see Bonaparte and his staff." Rees wrote, "When the enemy's artillery began to play on us, We could hear the shot and shell whistling around us, killing and wounding great numbers. He continued, "The word of command, 'Prepare to receive cavalry,' had been given. Every man in the front ranks knelt, and a wall bristling with steel, held together by steady hands, presented itself to the infuriated cuirassiers. The charge was bloodily repulsed." After that great victory, he was with the Army of Occupation in Paris. He describes the city in great detail, including, of course, the pleasures he enjoyed and also the desperate poverty of many of its citizens. He left the army in 1821 and was back in London. He was again enjoying the high life. He ran up debts he couldn't pay back, and so eventually he was thrown into debtor's prison for a while. Rees had married a French opera dancer in 1825 and evidently needed a new way to make a living. He set his sights on becoming a member of Parliament. He was a candidate for Great Grimsby in 1831, but lost out by a handful of votes. There was another general election in 1832, and Rees was determined not to lose again. As a candidate for Stafford, he somehow obtained the funds to bribe lots of people. He made no secret of it. "I set out to bribe every man, woman and child," he later confessed. It worked and he won. The bribery was so blatant that it was investigated by Parliament, which found the corruption to be open, general and systemic. But then it all seemed to have been forgotten about, and Rees kept his job. But not for long. Voters kicked him out in the general election of 1835. After that, he lived for some years in London, started to write about his memories. The first book of reminiscences sold well and brought him an income. He then moved to Paris. His first wife had either died or there was a divorce, I'm unsure of which. But in 1858, at the age of 63, he married a woman from an aristocratic Breton family. Rees and his second wife had 4 children, but when he died at the age of 70, in 1865, it was reported in one newspaper that he had left them wholly unprovided for. And so ended the life of a quite interesting man. He certainly did his duty as a soldier. He left us a vivid account of the campaigns in which he fought. Then he became quite well known simply for being a well-dressed man about town. Later in life, he became well known all over again because of his writing. And he left us a valuable and interesting account of his life and times.